My name is Mira, and I am the last person you'd expect to run away from everything. I was the girl who made lists, who always returned calls, who kept her calendar color-coded and her emotions boxed tight and tidy like files in a cabinet. But something broke. Quietly, invisibly, the way a cliff crumbles under your feet long before anyone hears the fall. And when it did, I drove 300 miles through the night and didn't stop until the road turned to gravel and the sky had shifted from black to a bruised, uncertain blue. That's how I ended up here, at the edge of nowhere, on the forgotten farm my grandfather left behind when he passed. A place with no Wi-Fi, no neighbors, no appointments, just wind, creaking wood, and a single breath of life. That didn't belong to me. His name was Storm, not the kind of name you expect for such a quiet creature. But it fit, somehow. Like he was made of thunder that had long since fallen silent. I first saw him the morning after I arrived, half asleep, dragging my suitcase into the crooked old barn as if it were a hotel lobby. There he stood. Massive. Still. Eyes the color of old smoke. He didn't whinny. He didn't flinch. He just watched me, and I watched him back. It was a strange kind of truce. I didn't ask why he was still here. He didn't ask what I was running from. The farm had been abandoned since Granddad passed last spring. My mother sold off most of the animals quickly, except for Storm. No one wanted him, she said over the phone. Too big, too stubborn. He only let your grandpa ride him anyway. Too stubborn. I almost laughed at that. Storm was huge, some draft mix, all muscle and weathered patience. His coat was a dull gray, like he'd been carved from the clouds overhead. And yet he carried a gentleness that unnerved me. Like he knew something about me I hadn't admitted yet. The first few days, we kept our distance. I slept in the farmhouse, cold and dusty, curled in a pile of old blankets. I walked the overgrown fields and wandered through memories I didn't want to have. Sometimes I'd end up near the barn again, standing by the fence. And there he was, always waiting, always watching, never approaching. I started bringing him apples. Not because I wanted to bond or anything poetic like that. I just didn't know what else to do with my hands. Don't get used to me, I muttered one day as I tossed him a bruised one from the kitchen. He blinked slowly and didn't move. Then, after a pause, he stepped forward. Not rushing, just enough to close. The distance. His breath hit my fingers. Warm, damp, real. I froze. That touch, soft, intentional, cut through more than any conversation I'd had in months. Because I wasn't here to heal. I didn't even believe in that kind of thing anymore. I was here to vanish. And yet, something about Storm refused to let me disappear. There was a stillness to him that mirrored the ache I carried, like we were both holding back something too big to name. Not broken, just tired. I started cleaning the barn out of habit, sweeping the floor, tossing the old hay, scrubbing the water trough, not because it mattered, but because I needed to move. Storm watched me, every time. Sometimes he'd let me touch his shoulder or run a brush down his flank, sometimes not. I respected that. Truth be told, I envied it, the way he chose when to. Let the world in. I hadn't figured that out. I'd let it in too long, too loud, too fast. Until I couldn't tell where other people ended, and I began. One night, I couldn't sleep. The wind was howling like a choir of ghosts through the broken shutters, and the house creaked in all directions. I wrapped myself in a coat, grabbed a flashlight, and walked to the barn. Storm was lying down in his stall, legs folded neatly, head raised. I should have gone back to bed. Instead, I stepped inside. He didn't move as I sat against the wall across from him, pulling my knees to my chest. The barn smelled of hay and earth and something older than both. "I don't even know why I'm here," I whispered. Storm blinked once, slow and heavy. "I had a life," I went on. "Good job, good apartment, good image." The word tasted bitter. I smiled. Answered emails, paid rent. I even had plants, the kind you have to mist. A soft snort came from Storm's direction, and I almost smiled. Almost. But inside I was disappearing, I whispered. No one noticed. Not really. The barn creaked again. Rain began tapping the roof. I stared at the floor. No one saw me slipping, and I didn't want them to. Silence. Then a sound. Hooves shifting against straw. Storm stood slowly, almost reluctantly. He crossed the stall, deliberate and steady, and lowered his head until his cheek brushed my shoulder. I froze. Again. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper. The quiet kind of awe you feel when someone chooses to be near you without asking, for anything. I didn't move as he eased himself down beside me. Not on me. Not yet. Just near. Close enough that I could feel his warmth seeping through the fabric of my coat. His breath stirred my hair. My heart was loud in my chest. He didn't lie on me that night. Not fully. That came later. But this was the beginning. The first time I let someone see the outline of my pain without pushing them away. Storm didn't need to understand words or stories. He just needed to be there. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to earn that presence. We sat in silence until the flashlight died and the rain turned to mist. Until my body gave in and I fell asleep against the wood. When I woke, he was still there, watching me with those deep, unreadable eyes. Maybe we both had storms inside us. Maybe that's why he stayed. Some people carry grief like a torch, high, bright, visible. Mine was different. I wore it like a second skin, invisible to everyone but me. Tight, suffocating, always there. I didn't talk about it. Not to my mother, not to my friends, definitely not to the therapist they recommended. Once, and I ghosted after 2 sessions, but Storm didn't ask me to talk. He just stayed. After that first night in the barn, something shifted. I started coming out more often, in the mornings with coffee, at sunset when the light turned the fields to fire. Storm was always near the fence, waiting, not with need, but with presence. It felt like permission to slow down, to exist. He let me groom him more regularly now. I'd stand beside him with a curry comb, working through his thick winter coat. The rhythm was soothing. Brush, pause, breath. And sometimes, as I brushed, I'd talk. Not loudly, not dramatically, just small pieces, things I hadn't told anyone else, like the fact that I quit my job a week before I came here, that I'd woken up one Monday, sat at the edge of the bed, and realized I couldn't do it anymore. No scandal, no explosion, just emptiness. I packed a bag, left a note on the counter of my apartment, drove until the city disappeared in the rearview mirror. It felt like failure. Everyone had always known me as the strong one, organized, reliable, smiling even when things cracked underneath. But strength, I was learning, can be a trap, a disguise you forget how to remove, and grief. Grief doesn't knock politely. It seeps in through the smallest cracks, then builds a nest inside you. My grandfather's death had been quiet and expected. He was old, peaceful. He died in his sleep. But it wasn't just losing him that crushed me. It was losing the last person who saw me. He was the one who taught me to ride when I was 10. The one who let me brush his horses, long before I could reach the saddles. The one who gave me a space where I didn't have to earn my place. After he passed, the world felt sharper, louder, less forgiving. I hadn't realized how much of my identity had been built in the quiet corners of his barn. And when that was gone, I didn't know who I was anymore. Storm, though. Storm seemed to remember. Maybe that's why he stayed behind when all the other horses were sold. He was older now, his knees stiff in the mornings, his eyes soft with age. But he carried something in him that reminded me of my grandfather. Patience, without pity, strength, without demand. One afternoon, as I sat in the grass near his pasture, I told him about the moment I realized I didn't recognize myself anymore. It wasn't even something big, I said, pulling at a blade of dry grass. I just caught my reflection in a store window. And I thought, who is she? Storm grazed nearby, ears flicking. I used to laugh easily, I went on. Used to dance around the kitchen. I loved stupid things. Movies with talking animals, glitter pens, cinnamon toast at midnight. He lifted his head and looked at me. I don't even remember the last time I let myself enjoy something. It's like the joy got edited out of my story. I paused, heart tight. I think I came here because I didn't know what else to do, not because I wanted to find myself, but because I needed to stop disappearing. Storm took a few steps closer, his hooves whispering through the grass. He lowered his head and nudged my arm. Not roughly, just enough to break the spiral. It was the kind of gesture that meant nothing and everything, a grounding touch. A reminder, here, now. I rested my forehead against his neck. He smelled like hay, dust, and something old and warm and familiar. And for a moment, I breathed without effort. Later, that evening, I found an old photo album tucked in a drawer under the stairs. The cover was cracked leather. Inside were photos of the farm, years ago. My grandfather, me as a child, a tiny gray foal standing behind me in one shot. Storm. I hadn't realized he'd been here that long. Suddenly it made sense. The way he looked at me. Not as a stranger, but as someone half-remembered. We had history. I'd just forgotten. The next day, I opened the back pasture gate and walked with him to the ridge. It wasn't far, just beyond the rise where the trees broke open and the view stretched for miles. He followed without hesitation. We stood there in silence, the wind tugging at my coat. His breath steamed in the cold air. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Steady. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. But it was the absence of drowning. That night I brought a blanket out to the barn and laid it in the straw. I didn't want to sleep in the house anymore. It felt too far away from everything that mattered. Storm watched me settle down in the corner of the stall. I tucked myself in and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. I don't know what comes next, I whispered into the dark. I just know I can't go back. There was a rustle of movement, then the soft thud of hooves. I turned my head just in time to see Storm lie down beside me. He didn't touch me. Not yet. But he lay close, his massive body curved around mine, like a wall against the world, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The barn smelled of memory, of everything I'd been, and everything I might still become. I reached out, fingers brushing his mane. Thanks for not giving up on me. Storm didn't reply. He didn't need to. He just stayed. It started with the wind, not the gentle kind, that rustles the trees and plays in your hair, but the howling, furious kind that slams shutters and shakes windows, that screams like something ancient and angry trying to claw its way out of the sky. I heard it just after sundown. The first crack of thunder rolled over the hills like a warning, and then the rain came. Fast, sideways, unrelenting. I was in the kitchen of the farmhouse, washing an apple in the dim light when the storm hit full force. The window panes rattled, and a gust tore open the back door before I could reach it. I slammed it shut, heart pounding. Storm. My mind went to him instantly. He hated thunder. Grandpa used to say so. Said it made the big horse nervous, made him pace and tremble. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat, a flashlight, and boots, and ran. The wind shoved at me like it wanted me to fall. Rain stung my face, soaked my jeans in seconds. The flashlight flickered once, then died. I didn't stop. The barn loomed out of the darkness like a shipwreck, half swallowed by the night. I pushed the door open against the storm's force and slipped inside, drenched and shaking. It was pitch black. "Storm!" I called, voice rising. No sound but the roar of rain on the tin roof. My heart thudded in my ears. "Storm!" A low whinny answered me from the back of the barn. I stumbled toward the sound, my soaked shoes squelching through the straw. Lightning lit the space for a split second, and I saw him, crouched low, chest heaving, eyes wide. He looked terrified. I dropped to my knees beside him. "It's okay," I whispered, though my voice trembled. "I'm here." Another flash of lightning cracked the sky, and Storm jerked, bumping into the stall wall, nearly knocking me over. "It's okay," I said again, louder now, putting my hand on his shoulder. "Hey, I've got you." He snorted, tense under my touch, muscles trembling beneath soaked hair. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know if horses could have panic attacks. But if they could, he was having one. I moved slowly, settling into the straw beside him, back against the wall, legs folded under me. "Breathe," I murmured more, to myself than to him. "Just breathe." I stayed like that for what felt like hours. Let the storm rage around us. Let the fear burn out. At some point, Storm stopped pacing. He came over slowly, carefully, and lowered his head, resting it on my shoulder. His breath warmed my neck, and a low, vibrating sigh left his body. And then, something I didn't expect. He knelt, one hoof, then another, folding his long legs under him until he was lying on the ground. And then he moved closer. So close, in fact, that when he shifted his massive body, he half lay across my legs. Gently, not crushing, not heavy enough to hurt. Just enough to ground me. I froze. His weight was solid, immense, anchoring, and I let him stay. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed to feel held, too. Maybe because I was tired of holding everything in. Whatever it was, I didn't move. I leaned back against the wall, wrapped one hand in his mane, and let the storm scream around us. The barn became a cocoon, of breath, of warmth, of silence between us. His body over mine was like a weighted blanket for the soul. I don't remember falling asleep. But I remember waking. It was still dark. Still raining. Storm hadn't moved. His side rose and fell slowly, rhythmically, like the ocean in a calm after rage. My legs were stiff but not in pain. I moved my fingers through his coarse mane and whispered into the dark. "I don't think I can go back." He didn't react, just kept breathing. "I miss who I used to be," I said. "Before the world expected me to be everything." A tear slid down my cheek. I miss my grandpa. I miss laughing. I miss sleeping without waking up in a panic. The words came like a flood. All the things I hadn't said. All the pieces I'd kept buried under smiles and small talk and polite emails. I'm so tired of pretending. Storm shifted slightly. Only enough to nudge his head closer to my chest. "And I'm scared," I whispered. Not of the storm, not of being alone, but of never finding myself again, of staying lost, of forgetting how to live instead of just survive. And in that barn, beneath a roof rattling from wind and rain, with a 1,000-pound horse stretched half across me like he knew I might float away, something in me cracked, not a collapse, a release. I sobbed quietly into his shoulder, hands clutching his mane, letting years of silent weight rise and dissolve like steam. And Storm. He didn't move. Not when I cried. Not when I shook. He just stayed. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I could too. I could stay, right here, right now, with nothing to prove, no mask to wear, just breath, just skin, just rain and heartbeat and horse. When the sun finally began to rise and the storm tapered into a whisper, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." And I meant it with everything in me. When the sun began to rise, I expected him to move, but he didn't. Storm lay across my legs, his massive body curled protectively beside me, as if even daylight wasn't enough reason to end what had started in the storm. I didn't move either. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to break whatever spell we were under. My legs were half numb, my back stiff from the barn floor. But for once I didn't care. Pain felt like proof of being alive. And for the first time in months, I wanted to be. I rested my cheek on Storm's neck. His coat was still damp, but warm beneath the surface, like the heat of a campfire buried under ash. I listened to the wind outside slow to a sigh, and that's when I heard it. Not wind, not rain, footsteps, not hoofbeats, boots. They crunched against the gravel outside, slow, cautious. Then they stopped just beyond the barn door. My breath hitched. Storm's ears twitched, but he didn't rise. A part of me wanted to call out, ask who was there. But something held me back. A cold knot of instinct tightened in my chest. Nobody was supposed to be here. Nobody knew I was here. And yet, the barn door creaked. Not wide, just enough to let in a sliver of gray morning light and a gust of sharp air. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. My heart slammed against my ribs, hard and fast. Storm lifted his head slowly. He didn't snort, didn't panic, just watched, unmoving. The door paused. Then, nothing. Silence. 10 long seconds passed. Then, the door creaked shut again. I exhaled shakily, only realizing then that I'd been holding my breath. I sat up, gently, so as not to startle Storm, and strained my ears. Nothing. Just wind, the soft shifting of trees, and a raven's distant cry. I stood, legs tingling with returning blood, and moved to the barn door. Storm followed behind me, silent, hulking, as if he understood something had changed. I peeked outside. Nothing. No one. Just the soaked gravel driveway, the empty fence line, and the mist curling low along the grass like smoke. Still, something didn't feel right. I stepped out slowly, my boots squelching in the mud. The morning was colder than expected, sharp, biting. My breath clouded in front of me. I walked around the side of the barn, and there it was, a boot print. Fresh. Deep. Not mine. I crouched, staring at it. The tread was unfamiliar, larger than my own boots, and facing the barn door. Someone had been there, and they hadn't knocked. They hadn't called out. They'd just watched. A shiver slid down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I returned to the barn, closed the door behind me and locked it, something I hadn't done once since I arrived. Storm watched me carefully. "You felt it too, didn't you?" I asked, placing my hand on his shoulder. He didn't move, just leaned slightly into the pressure. I spent the rest of the morning unsettled, made coffee with shaking hands, left the kitchen light on even after the sun had fully risen. The peace of the night had vanished like smoke. But by late afternoon, I tried to pull myself back. Storm needed to eat. The barn needed cleaning. The world didn't stop because someone left a footprint. Still, I checked the windows, kept my phone close, and that night I brought a flashlight, a thermos of tea, and a small knife I found in the kitchen drawer with me to the barn, just in case. Storm was waiting. He didn't lie on me this time, but he stood over me as I sat in, the hay, drinking the tea with shaking hands. I didn't speak much. He didn't move much, but I knew, deep in my bones, that he wouldn't let anyone get near without letting me know. As the evening crept in, the unease lingered. I kept glancing at the barn door. Every creak made my muscles tense. Hours passed. The flashlight dimmed. And eventually, exhausted from fear and lack of sleep, I curled up in the straw and drifted off. That's when I had the dream. I was 10 years old again, riding Storm across the back pasture. Grandpa stood at the fence, smiling. The wind was gentle, the sky bright, and the air full of laughter. But then something changed. The sky went dark. Grandpa faded into the mist. The grass turned to ash beneath Storm's hooves, and a figure stood in the distance, faceless, unmoving, watching. I woke up gasping. Storm was beside me, breathing steady. He had laid down again, his body pressed, lightly over my legs, just like the night before. I blinked, heart racing. Was it just the dream, or had I woken because something had disturbed him too? The barn was silent. The wind outside had stilled. But I felt it again, that electric awareness, like eyes on the back of my neck. I sat up slowly, careful not to disturb Storm's position. The knife was still in my jacket pocket. I reached for the flashlight. It flickered once, then died. Of course. I closed my eyes, steadied my breath. Storm shifted, just slightly, head rising, ears forward. Then came the sound. A soft creak on the barn floorboards near the entrance. Not loud, but enough. I froze. Storm stood up in a single fluid motion, placing himself fully between me and the door. I rose too, heart thundering, one hand still wrapped around the knife in my coat. Silence. Then, just, like before, nothing, no knock, no footsteps, just that eerie, unnatural stillness. Storm exhaled loudly, a sound like warning. Then, without being prompted, he stepped forward. Toward the door. I followed him, breath held. We reached the barn door together. I placed my hand on the lock, counted to 3, and swung it open. Nothing, empty night, mist and moonlight. The driveway empty. No one. But on the ground, clear in the moonlight, another print. This one fresher, closer. I closed the door again, locked it tight, and leaned against it, breath shallow. Storm stood beside me like a sentry, unmoving. I'm not imagining it, I whispered. He huffed. We stayed there a long time, long enough that my fear began to cool, not because the threat was gone, but because Storm hadn't left me once. He stood between me and danger. Between me and the dark. And when my legs gave out, and I sank slowly to the floor again, he did what I never expected. He lay down again, pressed his weight into my legs, warm and grounding. And this time, I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just let him stay. All night. Because he was the only one who ever had. When I woke up the next morning, Storm was gone. Not far. I could hear him, outside the barn, his hooves steady against the gravel. But for a split second, panic flared. After everything, after the fear, the silent visitor, the storm, I wasn't sure what I expected. But waking up alone again, it hit harder than I thought it would. I stood slowly, rubbing the stiffness from my knees, and pushed open the barn door. There he was, standing at the edge of the pasture, looking toward the tree line like he was waiting for something, or someone. I walked over quietly. The morning mist clung low to the grass, and the cold bit at my cheeks, but I barely noticed. "Hey," I said softly, placing a hand on his neck. He didn't flinch. Didn't even look at me. Just kept staring at the trees. And that's when I saw it. A figure. Too far to make out details. Just the silhouette of a person standing halfway down the slope, near the gate. Motionless. I froze. The same cold, instinctual fear from the night before came flooding back. Storm shifted beside me. Ears flicking forward, body tense. "What do you want?" I called out. No answer. Just wind. I took a step forward. The figure moved, slowly, deliberately, then turned and disappeared into the woods. Gone. Again. Storm pawed the ground, agitated. I hesitated for only a second before walking down toward the gate. I wasn't sure why. Curiosity. Defiance. A need to face whatever had haunted the edge of my safe place. Whatever it was, I had to know. The grass was wet. My boots slipped once on the slope. When I reached the gate, I found nothing but a faint trail of footprints, just like before, leading into the woods. They ended at the tree line. I stood there, staring into the dense thicket. Whoever it was, they were careful, watching, but never approaching, always staying just out of reach. Why? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to be afraid anymore. Not here. Not with Storm. Later that afternoon, I called the sheriff's office. Not to report a crime, there hadn't been one, but just to say what I'd seen. To make it real. They promised to send someone by the next day. That was enough for now. When I hung up the phone, I expected to feel anxious again, but I didn't. Instead, I felt clear, like a line had been drawn, like I'd finally decided that this place, this farm, this barn, this horse, was mine to protect, not run from. I spent the rest of the day fixing things, hammered a loose board back into the fence, swept out the hayloft, tightened the latch on the back gate, even oiled Storm's tack. Though I hadn't ridden in years, Storm watched me the whole time. Not needy, not nervous, just there. That night, I didn't sleep in the house or the barn. I brought a blanket out to the edge of the pasture and sat under the stars, leaning against Storm's warm side. He lay down beside me once more. This time not because I was broken, but because we both knew something had shifted. We stayed like that until dawn painted the sky, and when I stood, legs strong, shoulders back, I felt it. I had come home to myself, not just to the farm, not just to Storm, but to a version of me I thought was lost, and I wasn't leaving again. The sheriff showed up the next day, a woman in her 50s named Deidre. Calm eyes, weathered hands. I told her everything. About the footsteps, the prints, the silent figure by the gate. She listened, asked questions, then walked the perimeter with me. She didn't find much. just the old trail, a few fresh scuffs in the dirt, and a rusted cigarette butt near the fence post. She looked at it, squinted, then shrugged. Could be some drifter, she said. Or someone from town who didn't know the place was taken again. Or someone who did, I said. She nodded slowly. Could be. I'll keep an eye out. But I don't think they mean harm. I wanted to believe her, but some part of me stayed on alert. That night, I locked everything, let Storm out to graze close to the barn, slept in the tack room with the windows cracked and the knife still near my hand. But nothing happened. No footsteps. No prints. Just stars. Wind. The sound of crickets returning to the grass. Over the next week, I settled into something like a rhythm. I made a list of things to repair. Fences, windows, the sagging porch. Storm and I went for short walks up the ridge each morning. I brushed him daily. Talked to him often. I still hadn't gotten on his back, but I was thinking about it. Then, on the 8th morning, I woke to find an envelope under the barn door. Just one word on the front. Sorry. No name. No explanation. Just a single sheet of folded paper, slightly damp from the morning dew. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a rough pencil sketch. A horse. Storm, unmistakably. Standing in front of the barn, calm and proud. No message. No threat, just that. I showed it to Sheriff Deidre later that day. She looked at it for a long moment, then handed it back. Still don't think they mean harm, she said. But keep it anyway. I did. I pinned it to the inside of the barn door. Storm sniffed it once and didn't react. I took that as a sign. That night, something changed again. Not outside, inside me. I brought out the saddle, dusty, but intact. Storm stood still as I lifted it onto his back. No protest. No flinch. As if he'd been waiting for this too. I fastened the girth with steady hands. Okay, I whispered. Let's try. I mounted slowly, carefully, feeling every creak in the leather, every breath in his ribs, and then we moved. Just a few steps. Then a walk down the fence line. And then we were riding. Really riding. For the first time in years. The wind on my face. His power beneath me. The rhythm of hoofbeats in the dirt like a heartbeat I'd almost forgotten. I laughed. Really laughed. Stormsy. Ears flicked back at the sound. We rode until the stars came out, and when we stopped near the ridge, I slid off, fell to my knees in the grass, and hugged him. Arms around his massive neck, forehead against his chest. Thank you, I whispered again, for not giving up on me. He huffed softly, breath warm in my ear. We stood there until the cold sent us back to the barn. I still don't know who left the drawing. Still don't know who watched me from the trees that night. But I stopped needing to know. Some things don't get wrapped in neat endings. Some storms don't pass all at once. But I do know this. He lay on me when I couldn't stand. He stayed when no one else did. And he carried me back to myself, step by patient step. So yes, he lay on me, and I let him stay. All night, because I needed him. And somehow, in his own silent way, he needed me too.